Thanks for joining us today on UnboundRadio.com. I have my best buddies and contributors on the line, Rory and Peter. Gentlemen, good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for coming on again. And I want to thank Rory for helping us get an exciting lineup of guests over the next few months. Rory's done a great job helping me line up Richard Grove, Mike Maloney, Greg Hunter, Michael Snyder from the Economic Collapse blog, and many others. So you'll want to stay tuned. And today's show is a critical one, too. In the second half today, we have former IRS agent turned whistleblower and one of the stars of Aaron Russo's film America, Freedom to Fascism, Joe Bannister. But right now, we have our friend Harley Schlanger on the line to talk about Wall Street's, quote, war on the people. Harley, welcome.
Hello, Sean. Glad to be with you.
Well, thanks for joining us on short notice, Harley. I just called you the other day and said, can you come on? Because I am really shocked about what's going on in Detroit. Harley, on May 11th, 2010, LaRouche received a message during a live webcast from a Wall Street insider saying that international financial interests would consider the restoration of Glass-Steagall an act of war. Now, since the July 11th introduction of the Warren-McCain Senate bill for a 21st Century Glass-Steagall Act, that war has begun. Now, Harley, I want people to know the LaRouche PAC Policy Committee representing activists and citizens across this nation have been on the ground in D.C. delivering the message to Congress. If they fail and Glass-Steagall were defeated, those members, according to LaRouche PAC, those members of Congress would be responsible for the lives lost when the people are liquidated in the next great crash. Now, Harley, what's happening in Detroit is on the front of my mind, and let me help the audience understand that the LaRouche folks and Lyndon LaRouche himself are making three demands right now. Number one, a new Pecora commission must be convened and criminal prosecutions must be launched. Number two, we need a full expose of who in Congress actually belongs to Wall Street. And number three, in light of the Detroit bankruptcy, we need a list of the crimes committed by Wall Street and its European partners within each state of this union. Harley, we're going to break in 1 minute and 20 seconds. What is your take on what we're seeing in Detroit?
Well, what we're seeing is what LaRouche characterized as the bail-in. What's happened is that an agreement was made by an emergency financial manager who's basically got dictatorial powers to take whatever liquidity there is in Detroit and give it to the banks on these credit default swap risk management agreements that the banks forced the city to buy that are now taking up $225 million of the Detroit revenue, which is 15% of their revenue, and they're defaulting on pension bonds. And this is a model. Chicago's next, Omaha, Oakland, there's a whole list of cities. This is the Greek policy of the IMF and the European Union brought to the United States, backed by the president and backed by Wall Street.
That's right. And it's Cyprus. It's the model we've seen. It's the model that's coming here. We've been warning people for a long time. Our austerity is coming to the United States, and now we know how it's going to be done. And Detroit is the case study. Harley, I absolutely have goosebumps today. I mentioned the fact that what's happening in Detroit is a case study. You know it. I know it. We all know now what's going to happen to the rest of this country if the Wall Street bankers aren't tied down with Glass-Steagall. What's happening in Detroit is murder. Now, I want to play for you a clip from Bill Roberts, a former candidate in Michigan for U.S. Congress, who got 41% of the vote. I know he's a friend of LaRouche. I think he actually, does he work for your organization, Harley?
Yes, he's on the LaRouche PAC Policy Committee with me.
Yeah, he's fantastic. And I want to play this 1 minute clip from him because everyone needs to understand Detroit is the case study and the Wall Street banks are going to gut this country. They're going to get the pensions. They're going to get it all, just like George Carlin said, just like you've predicted, Harley, just like so many people, Gerald Celente and others have predicted. They're going to get it all. Here's why.
As Kevin Orr maneuvers to pay city pensioners merely pennies on the dollar, he has worked out a separate deal with the city's biggest creditors, Bank of America, Deutsche Bank, Union Bank of Scotland, and others, promising to pay them 75 to 80 cents on the dollar for interest rate swaps and other derivatives deals which Detroit had been lured into purchasing in a desperate attempt to raise revenue over recent years. These debtor-in-possession loan deals take precedence for repayment above all other creditors in bankruptcy proceedings. Such an agreement with the very banks responsible for Detroit's bankruptcy to sacrifice the unsecured creditors among the pensioners and city workers for the sake of fulfilling the city's obligations to the banks is the mirror image of the bail-in policy which the EU financial dictatorship forced down the throats of the people of Cyprus. What we now see in the case of Detroit is by no means an isolated case of bad financial management or necessary but temporary pain, as the Obama administration would claim.
Now, Harley, I want you to tell us what is going to happen if Congress fails to re-implement Glass-Steagall.
Well, what we see is two things going on simultaneously. One is the continuation of the bail-out policy, which is Bernanke's quantitative easing, which is the Federal Reserve providing unlimited funds to European banks that are about to go under. And in return for that, the banks have no obligation to re-regulate. The banks have completely open door to them. They get the money from the Fed. They're under no obligation to create loans. And then the second phase of this is the austerity, the demands for cutbacks, whether it's Social Security and Medicare, cutbacks in infrastructure, cutbacks in our defense budget. And here we are in two wars. We're seeing an explosion in the Middle East, and the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said we don't have the money anymore to sustain these operations. Now, the point I would make here is that austerity doesn't work. It's an incompetent approach. It's a murderous approach. The austerity regimes imposed by the International Monetary Fund on behalf of the global banksters have destroyed the economies of Greece, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Ireland. France is next. The former chief economist of the European Central Bank, named Jürgen Stark, said that after the German elections in September, Germany is going to have to bail out the two largest French banks. Now, in this country, what we've seen is budget cuts. The state of California has had $120 billion in budget cuts over the last 8 years since Schwarzenegger came in, and it still can't meet its budget. The reason is that if you just cut spending, all you do is ensure that whatever money is there goes straight to the banks. That's what we see in Detroit. That's what we're going to see in Chicago now that its rating was cut 3 levels, so that it's going to cost more to borrow money, and they're going to take it out on teachers, police, fire, and others. Now, the second point is that not only does austerity not work, but it starts to kill. In Italy, for the first time in its history, since they've kept records, the birth rate has fallen below the death rate. That's already happened in Greece. And so we're seeing these countries destroyed by this policy. Now, the same thing's happening in the United States. The Obamacare is going to start killing off seniors, the sick people. It's not a health care program. It's a murder policy. Now, the way you address this crisis is you have austerity against the too big to fail banks. That's what Glass-Steagall is. It says we're not going to bail you out or let you bail yourself in by stealing deposits or stealing pension funds. The banks that are the thieves and the crooks who made these speculative swindles are going to be cut off from any lifeline from the Federal Reserve or from the government. And in return, the commercial banks that wish to stay in business among the too big to fail banks will have to break off their speculative investment bank and insurance projects. And, we just saw this thing with J.P. Morgan Chase buying commodities, using commodity sales to set up derivative speculation on electricity and aluminum, among other things, driving up the cost per kilowatt hour of electricity, driving up the cost of aluminum for beer cans. For what purpose? To make money for their derivative section. So this will end with Glass-Steagall. Then we've got to channel credit to the productive sector of our economy to produce jobs. The way you deal with underfunded pensions is you have more people employed who pay into a pension system. Same thing with Social Security. Same thing with Medicare. And let me just add one more point here, Sean. What we've had under Bush and then Obama is a shrinkage of the productive workforce so that only 49%, according to government figures, 49% in America have full-time jobs. It's below 50% of the potential workforce. And that's not by choice. women wanting to stay home with children or, whatever reasons people might have. It's forced on them by the collapse of the physical economy, so that we're now largely a nation of unemployed, part-time, temporary, and low-wage jobs.
Yeah, now what I think is important, Harley, for people to understand is that I don't think anybody here, Rory, Peter, me, you, or anybody that we know who's libertarian, has a libertarian mindset, would back Detroit's decisions over the past, several decades. Now, I'm not making an argument that maybe pension holders that worked for the government, maybe they made more than they should have made in their salaries. Maybe they had pension obligation promises that exceeded what should have ever been agreed upon. I don't dispute any of that. My problem and my fear with what we're seeing in Detroit is that this literal murder of Detroit, right? When they overpromised and got themselves into a debt situation and they turned to Wall Street, it was Wall Street fraud through these interest rate swaps, this deliberate fraud to bury Detroit under more unrepayable debt, which is the Greece and the Cyprus model. And right. That is the murder of Detroit. That's the concern here for me. I want people to understand. I'm not defending Detroit or its politicians. I am saying that we as a people need to get our representatives to tie down Wall Street or we're all doomed. Now, LaRouche PAC put out a video recently that we posted. I just want to read you this quick quote. The murder of Detroit, the dumping of pension obligations, the gutting of the public sector, and eliminating obligations to shareholders for the sake of paying off creditors is the Dodd-Frank template. Until you get Glass-Steagall, Detroit can and will happen again. And when it happens to you, your city won't even get the dignity of a funeral. Harley, with these representatives, what are our chances of getting Glass-Steagall re-implemented? Because as we've seen, these people won't even vote against NSA spying.
Well, actually, the NSA spying vote showed a good sign because 205 congressmen broke with Obama, the Democratic leadership, and the Republican leadership to vote to limit the NSA. So I saw that as a step forward, but it's got to happen quickly. I just want to make two quick points that will make this more real to people. On the Detroit situation, look, the question of what they're doing in Detroit, they're going to do the same thing to private pension funds. When it comes down to the hedge funds and the shadow banking system and the investment banks, when they run into trouble, which they're going to because they can't cover their total debt, they're going to take it out of your 401k. I don't care if it's a well-managed fund or not. This is the precedent that's being set, that they can take it away from anybody. Now, the second, and you made this quite well, that these are funds that people paid into, so that whether, I find it somewhat galling that Jamie Dimon, who makes $50 million bonus, is saying that the reason the country's in trouble is we're paying $21,000 to retired teachers. I find that absurd.
Yeah.
And that's not the reason our banking system is collapsing. It's because they've built up hundreds of trillions of dollars of obligations in derivatives. That in the case of Detroit, the city had to borrow money in 2005. And in order to borrow money from a bank to finance bonds, they had to buy insurance policy from that bank. Now, under Glass-Steagall, that would not be allowed. Then they've had to decide, do we really need these bonds?
That's right.
And if we do need them, then we better make sure we can pay them. Instead, they were sold these interest rate swaps and told that this would make sure that if the rates changed, they would be covered. The banks that sold them the swaps then, through LIBOR, rigged the rates so that the city had to pay more. And that's what this $225 million payment is. Now, this is not democracy. The people of Detroit have no say in this. This is a financial manager appointed by the governor who has total power over the budget. And one of the people who joined us in Washington this week was Lamar Lemons III, who's the superintendent of education, the head of the board of education in Detroit, an elected position, who said that he and his board have no say over what money goes to the schools. Now, you ask, what chance do we have? The question is, what chance do we have of survival if we don't get it? We've seen now in the Senate, 2 more senators joined with the McCain-Warren bill. So we now have 6 co-sponsors. That needs to go way up. We need to say to these congressmen, don't come back to the district until you've shown us that you'll defend the Constitution against these bankers, against these usurpers like Obama and the NSA. Sean, you probably saw this, that people like Michelle Bachmann and Mike Rogers, supposedly conservative Republicans, joined with Obama to defeat the Amish bill on limiting the NSA.
Yeah.
So we've got to demand that progressives and libertarians together have shown that they're ready to fight, but they've got to see it from the population. We've got to bombard the Congress over the next days to keep them in session and take up Glass-Steagall as an emergency measure to save the nation.
That's right. And real quickly on Bachmann, she's announced that she's not running again, and to me, her vote on that was just a message to those that will write her next check when she retires from Congress and she goes to work in the private sector. I think it was just disgusting what she did, and shocking if she calls herself a Tea Party person, which is how she often has represented herself. Harley, we're going to break here in about a minute, less than a minute. Let's recap this and put a finer point and an exclamation point on it, because the Wall Street insider that contacted LaRouche back in 2010 said, Glass-Steagall, any reimplementation of Glass-Steagall will be viewed by Wall Street as, quote, an act of war. That's really shocking language, but at the same time, to any clear-thinking person, we are already at war with Wall Street. It is Wall Street. It's Wall Street versus humanity. I've often said for the past 2 years, I've signed off on a lot of my videos saying it's the banksters versus humanity. I want to just mention one thing here. Earlier in the show, we talked about the LaRouche flank, 3 demands, one of which is a new PCOR commission, which must be convened and criminal prosecutions must be launched. And the second point on that one is we need a full expose of who in Congress actually belongs to Wall Street. And that's the one that concerns me, Harley, because we cannot win this war against the banksters if the representatives who pretend to represent us don't. And if they're in the pockets of Wall Street. Michelle Bachmann's vote on the NSA has me concerned. Recently, we've got the New Jersey Governor Chris Christie calling Rand Paul and libertarians dangerous. His exact quote was, this strain of libertarianism that's going through parties right now and making big headlines, I think it's a very dangerous thought. Harley, if we don't win our representatives back or kick out the dishonest ones, how are we ever going to win this war against the banksters that they've declared on us, by the way?
Well, we have to win it. I mean, there's no alternative. And Chris Christie is an example of a Wall Street Republican who's very comfortable working with a Wall Street Democrat like Obama. But, here's my experience has been that there have been cases where there are people who take money from these interests, and if they actually get enough pressure from their base, they'll vote the right way. And we should say to them, all right, take the money, but vote with us. And we have to make them more frightened that they're going to lose their constituents. Most of the time, we have maybe 50% or less of the people who are registered actually vote. And so our elected officials are usually elected with a quarter of the actual registered voters. And since only about half the country is registered, it's about 12.5% of the citizens are choosing who represent us. Now, if we actually have a citizens' movement, restore the Constitution with the idea of a second American Revolution to defeat these private special interests that today are the same families that our founding fathers fought when it was the British East India Company. Now they're called Royal Bank of Scotland, Deutsche Bank, J.P. Morgan Chase. If we can get the story out, which includes who's paying the Congress, and then secondly, what are the crimes of these banks that the Congress are protecting? And that if you support them, if you're in the Congress and you support J.P. Morgan Chase after all the evidence of their fraud and corruption, then you are a traitor. Not even someone who can be unelected, can be forced out of office. We've got to have a riled up citizenry. And you do a good job of bringing these issues forward. I want to give people an 800 number they can call me because the time is short. We're really scheduled for August 2nd recess, and we've got to maximize the firepower we put under the rear ends of these congressmen.
Yeah, and I want people to call you, and I want people to get involved. And one of the reasons I love you and what you guys are doing over there is because you have boots on the ground. You're actually talking to representatives. You're trying to implement change for the good of humanity, for the good of the American people. And a lot of people want to accuse us who talk about these real issues as being doomers or people that peddle fear porn. And the reality is we deal in reality. And what I love about the LaRouche PAC folks and you, Harley, is that you are actively trying to do something. So anybody that's looking for good news or a real way to take action and fight back, call Harley and get involved, or go to my website and type in LaRouche in the upper right-hand search bar. You'll get all their recent reports from D.C. Harley, we have about a minute left. Give them your information, please. And thanks so much for joining us today.
Sure, and I'm always appreciative to have a talk with you, Sean. The number to call is 800-922-2907, and your listeners who have called know that I will return the call. It may take me a day or two, but I'm on the case. 800-922-2907. Tell us who your congressman is, and we'll see if we've got something moving in your district and in their office. 800-922-2907.
And for the latest real news coming out of the LaRouche organization, Harley, tell folks where they can find that. What's the website?
It's LaRouchePAC.com. And you'll get reports from the 6 policy committee members who have been meeting with the Congress, who've been at the Black Caucus, they've been at the Tea Party meetings. They've been stirring things up and really making life miserable for the traitors in the Congress.
Well, I want to thank our friend Michelle. She's your friend. She introduced me to you a while back, and boy, what a great thing, because you're such a great friend to Liberty, and we're so glad to know you, Harley. Thanks for taking time on short notice to join us again today. Harley Schlanger from LaRouche. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.